I always knew I was built differently. Well, to put it bluntly, I thought there was something horrifically wrong with me. For as long as I can remember, I've been attracted to boys, girls, and everything in between and outside of that binary. Gender never mattered to me. But something happened when I was a kid that made me repress those feelings. Whether it was playground bullying or learning adults' prejudices against people of different sexualities, it made me think that during my sexual development I had a brain disease. It was fucked. I knew I was mostly normal, but I just didn't know anyone like me. And I never saw anyone who was like me. I was alone in a sea of allo cis heteronormative propaganda, and nothing I consumed told me it was normal to be me. This made me withdraw this part of me deep inside myself, only allowing myself to indulge in my desires in my most private and isolating moments. It even got so bad that when I eventually met other people like me, I started to project those insecurities that I had about myself onto them.
This is obviously something you're just doing for attention.
You're either gay or straight. Pick one.
This is what happens when we aren't taught about ourselves. This is what happens when all society wants us to do is be put into boxes and never rebel and never go outside of the norms that it asks us to adhere to. If we aren't taught about ourselves though, how are we gonna know? And outside of the classroom, the only way that we can learn about ourselves is through media. But all I really had at the time when I was growing up was Queer as Folk, which was a gay show for cis gay men. And that wasn't me. I wasn't homosexual, I was bisexual. And that's why I wish I'd have known about Berserk.
So a quick intro into Berserk. It's an incredibly wonderful, horrific, beautiful, terrifying manga and anime series that personally I think is one of the best works of art to describe the human condition in our history. But I'm biased for a number of reasons, one of which you're learning now. It's extremely graphic and explores themes of trauma, abuse, violence, so there's a lot of content to warn about in there if you're looking to read or watch it for the first time. But one of the things that struck me about Berserk straight away is that it is absolutely, unequivocally, and indisputably queer. Not only is it queer, but it's polyamorous too, and it's not just based in lust. These characters love each other, and I mean love each other. Look! They of course lust after each other too, and some of the biggest plot moments in this entire story are motivated by the love that is cultivated between these three characters. Now, particularly, I'm going to be making my case for this in what is known as the Golden Age arc of Berserk, but I will be going into multiple instances later in the manga, so if you're not fully read up on Berserk yet, just know there will be spoilers in this. I'm also not going to be spending too much time on Berserk's main story points, or talking about Kentaro Miura's phenomenally intricately detailed art in the manga, nor the extremely awesome synth-based multiple culture fusion soundtrack by Susumu Hirasawa from the anime. There are some excellent video essayists like Super Eye Patch Wolf and Lady Emily who've already done some great videos that talk about that stuff and more that you should go and watch. Links in the description. No, what I'm going to be talking about is how my journey as a queer person relates to the implicit queer representation in Berserk and what that means to me and my queer friends who love Berserk too. And again, just to be absolutely crystal clear on this is not a video that is an introduction to Berserk. If you don't care about reading Berserk, cool, I think you'll probably get something out of this video anyway if you're just a queer, polyamorous person. But if you haven't read Berserk and you want to get into it, I'm going to be talking to you in this video as if you've read it, assuming that you know all the story points that I'm going on about. So again, if you want a better introduction video to Berserk, go and check out Super Eye Patch Wolf or Lady Emily's videos on it. But if you're fully read up or you don't give a fuck, let's get into it.
It was only around the age of 28 that I realized that I was bisexual. Like I said previously, I thought I had some kind of a brain disease, which was not ideal. But I was extremely blessed at that time to be in a community and in an online space where people were very accepting of people questioning their sexuality and questioning whether they're queer or not. And in fact, I'm even more grateful that many of those people are still here supporting me on Twitch and YouTube today. But it didn't come easy. And in fact, I spent many a drunken night here in Manchester's gay village, just kind of hoping that I could make something happen, or maybe that a mysterious twunk would come and seduce me, so that I would know finally that I was queer, and that I was okay, and that I didn't have a mental problem. And that, of course, led to some really bad scenarios that were not just bad for me, but bad for other people involved. This is something a lot of repressed queer people do. And a lot of the time, I don't think we realize that we end up hurting other queers with this behavior. I remember the amount of times that I used to DM a gay guy that I knew, asking him to come and hang out with me. A vague bit of flirting that didn't really serve anyone. And in fact, I became so nervous when he actually turned up to hang out with me, because I didn't really understand the dynamics of queer sex. It was never explained to me. I didn't know about tops, bottoms, verse, bears, otters. And in fact, I also thought that a lot of gay sex was steeped in kink, leather, latex, all that kind of stuff. And that was something that I wasn't so sure in myself at that time that I knew I'd be into. And I certainly wasn't about to go around asking anyone any questions. Another part of who I was that I chose to repress really was a polyamorous person. And at the moment, I practice ethical non-monogamy. Monogamy in and of itself is not bad. I think that it's important for everybody to understand that. It's not just, something that everybody should be doing now. Everybody doesn't need to be polyamorous or ethically non-monogamous. But I do think it's important that we fight against those ideas of compulsory monogamy. In practicing ethical non-monogamy and polyamory, not only are you directly challenging the allo cis heteronormative propaganda that we're shown all the time, I guess you can add monogamous onto that already very long hyphenated term, but you're also challenging the world that we live in general. You're challenging those boxes that we're put in. I guess it's generally seen that polyamory and ethical non-monogamy are seen as inherently queer, but it's not. You can absolutely be allo cis het and practice ethical non-monogamy or polyamory. It's entirely up to you. And I would in fact encourage it because, again, you're challenging norms, you're pushing the boundaries of the white, cis, hetero, patriarchal society that we live in. But when I finally discovered who I was and accepted it, it just so happened to coincide with me getting into a particular game series. And it fast became one of my favorite video game series ever. And that is Dark Souls.
And Dark Souls is an incredibly brutal game that has a fantastic mix of Eastern Asian, particularly Japanese influence and interpretation of European medieval fantasy. I quickly became obsessed with this game series. In fact, I became so obsessed that I'm actually technically, unofficially, one of the top 40 speedrunners in the world for the glitchless any% Black Knight Halberd category. I wanted to know everything about the game. I wanted to know everything about From Software, the developers, and Hidetaka Miyazaki, the director of the series. And some of my chatters on Twitch told me that the game was heavily inspired by something called Berserk. I had to see this. After quizzing my Twitch chat over and over again about the best way to get into Berserk, I finally realized that I should just watch the 1997 anime. As I was told, correctly it turns out, that it was the best one. And Kentaro Miura, the creator of Berserk, was actually deeply involved in the production as well. Now, personally, I love 90s style animes. The animation style and voice acting just has a natural allure for me, probably due to the nostalgia of watching Dragon Ball Z and Tenchi Muyo growing up in that decade. So by episode 1, I was already in love, but then extremely confused as to why episode 2 jumps into the main character Guts' past. And then I saw him. When you first see Griffith, he's got his helmet on and alluded to being an absurdly powerful man with absolutely no mercy or sympathy for people he meets on the battlefield. But when we see him with his helmet off, he is this beautiful, androgynous, mystical being that's soft-spoken, kind, loving, albeit ruthless in his conviction and desires. And from the very first moment he meets Guts, it gets pretty fucking gay. We also meet Casca soon after, and she's not exactly your cis heteronormative representation of a woman either.
You see, it's this whole scene, not just in the anime, but in the manga too, that really solidifies Berserk as a queer polyamorous love story to me.
This is just after Guts meets Griffith and Casca and the rest of the Band of the Hawk for the first time. Caucus, who is mostly motivated by greed and jealousy and just wanting to be the biggest and best warrior of them all, tries to jack Guts' gold that he got from his mercenary work, and after Guts kills 2 members of the Band of the Hawk who are trying to attack him with Caucus, Casca steps in and is overpowered by Guts, at which point Griffith turns up and just casually stabs him in the shoulder.
After Guts is completely healed up, Griffith takes him for a walk, whereby he ends up telling him that he admires him a lot and he's taken a liking to him and he wants him. To which Guts responds, "Are you a homo?" And Griffith doesn't even deny this, he just kind of, stands there with the anime sweat dripping down his face. But Griffith pushes on, further detailing his admiration. And you can kind of tell that Guts is a little bit humbled here as well. Griffith is the only person to have defeated him in battle, and he's killed hundreds of men, and he's finally met the man that can bring him to his knees. Guts' personality gets the better of him, and he challenges Griffith again to a duel, claiming that they're enemies, and strikes up a curious deal. Now, Guts so far in the story we know is being extremely violent and won't hesitate to kill someone. But all he really says he's gonna do to Griffith is give him a wound to match his, which is kind of weird. Is that like getting a couple of tattoos that are the same thing that couples do? I don't know. But he also specifies that if Griffith wins the duel, then he'll be Griffith's soldier or... Now, I've blurred this to comply with YouTube's community guidelines, but that's the F word right there, like gay boy. And what's extra cute here is that Griffith just kind of says, alright. After the extremely fierce battle that entails, Griffith approaches the defeated Guts on the ground, takes his head in his hands, and says, "Now you belong to me." Even the other soldiers in the next panel are like, "What are you talking about? Why are you saying it like that?" It's important to note that in this scene in the anime, Susumu Hirasawa's song Guts plays. But what's curious about the usage of this song in particular, even though it's supposed to just be the theme of Guts and it plays at various points in the anime after this, is that if you're a music nerd like me, you'll recognize a lot of the traits in this music as being those of a love song. The soft piano, the beautiful ethereal vocals. This is a love scene. I mean, just listen to the song. And what further entrenches this in queer polyamorous coding is the way that Casca reacts. Casca is absolutely fucking gutted that Griffith is so enamored with Guts. Casca muses on the fact that he's never said that before. Griffith's never said anything like that. And Casca, as we discover later, has been in the Band of the Hawk for years, since she was a literal child. Casca's also going to be extremely pissed off because in the previous scene, after Guts and Griffith's and Casca's and the Band of the Hawk's first encounter, Griffith demands that she use her naked body to warm Guts as he heals, claiming that it's a woman's job to serve men. This clear misogyny and manipulation on Griffith's part is obviously gross, but absolutely signifies that Guts is someone extremely special to him. Griffith clearly knows that Casca is absolutely hopelessly in love with him and abuses this, not just at this point in the anime, but in a few other ways later on down the line. And this scene that is littered with romantic tropes, jealousy, and passion is the main scene that kicks off the Golden Age arc. This is the main story arc in Berserk. It's where everything comes from. Everything that happens in Berserk is related to this story arc, and it's queer as hell. I think for the purposes of this video, we should look at the queer-coded elements of each character in detail. But I only see myself in one of the characters in Berserk, and I thought it would be cool to bring along and include some friends who may see themselves in the other characters. Just because I read them as queer doesn't mean that other people will. So here's one of my good friends to talk about how he feels about Casca and what she means to her.
My experience with Berserk is I read it when I was younger, like so maybe like almost a decade ago at this point, or maybe like early 20s.
So you use both he, him, and she, her pronouns. And I just wanted to ask you about your identity and how you identify and stuff like that.
I don't know. I think Casca's almost like a good springboard to talk about that, because like there's like all these scenes where she's like, I didn't ask to be a woman. And that just like, I don't know, that just really resonated with me. I think for me, like my gender identity is like, I always grew up like hanging out with guys because a lot of my interest had to do with just not on purpose, but just gravitated towards stuff that I guess people consider like for like boys to like. Like there were these moments where it was okay for me to like these things because I was a kid, and there was like moments where people like made it really clear like why is a girl here. That was always just very confusing for me because I always had just like felt like I was a person. I think I'm very similar to like what people would consider non-binary. But I think for me, the reason why I'm bigender and I go by he, him, or she, her is because I really like being called he as well. There's a way that I have always felt like I'm just one of the guys, and it's confusing because I'm just seen as a woman, and there's ways that I wish I could just kind of snap my fingers and just like appear as a guy. And I also like looking feminine too. So there's ways that I could just snap, I wish I could just snap my fingers and look like a woman. I wish I could just like, fluidly just kind of like just go in between either of those.
It's great that you immediately sort of said, well, yeah, she's a great springboard into this, because that is Casca, isn't it? Like Casca, like is one of the guys essentially, like as far as I see when I see the story.
I think the hard thing about Casca for me is like there's stuff that like makes sense. Like there's stuff where like it makes sense where she's just like she's constantly like, hey, like I'm one of you. Like people are constantly putting her down because she's a woman, and she's constantly resenting it. That's something that I relate to. And yeah, there's like things like with like the way she's drawn and her appearance, but there's like this like kind of bother me. Like in the anime, like she's always wearing lipstick, but she's also like trying to fit in as one of the guys. And there's like this way where she's just kind of like, she's never treated as one of the guys. And that's something that like always really bothers me, because I think I've had a lot of resentment about that. And I can talk about that a little bit, but she's also like someone who is like supposed to be like this strong woman, and they always say that about her, but then she's always like, almost always, like Guts has to save her, or someone has to save her, Griffith has to save her. Yeah, there's parts where she's fighting other people and they're like, oh, like you're a woman, you can't be here, and then she fights them and she kicks butt. That's really cool. But there are probably way more scenarios where Griffith and Guts have to save her, and she's supposed to be written as this very strong woman, and she's actually still constantly like, coded as a damsel in distress. I guess there's things that I relate to Casca, and there's like things that like hit a sore spot, because I can see how she's not truly one of the guys in a way that hurts, because I kind of feel that pain. Yeah, like when you talk about like Casca being trans mask, that's something that spoke to me. Like the way that Casca's written reminds me of like my younger self, like awkwardly trying to get through life and like figure out my identity. It's interesting to me because like I think I really relate to Casca because she almost reminds me of someone who's like maybe almost like bigender, because like she gets all like kind of like blushy and stuff when she's like wearing a dress as well. So it's like there's like this way where it almost seems like she's trying to embody both spaces, which is something that like I could really relate to. There's all these moments where she like sees Griffith and she really wants Griffith to see her. There's like multiple ways where she feels like she's less important, and that's as someone who's like as a commander, as a fighter, she's jealous of Guts. Both her and Guts are like maybe even like in like love with Griffith. But there's also something that like kind of like stuck out to me too, like when Griffith is like flirting with Princess Charlotte, and there's like all these moments where Casca's like tries to talk to Griffith, and then like Princess Charlotte's there, and then it's like, oh wait, like to me in those scenes it makes me feel like Casca's like never going to be that feminine, and to me there's like some sort of like identity crisis, and that's something that to me like felt really relatable. Like there's a way where I felt like I'm never going to be that feminine, or people won't see me as that feminine, which I think is kind of funny because I think now people do, or like the way I present myself is pretty feminine, but I've like unlocked how to be able to do that somehow. There was a time in my life where I was like trying to make peace with that, where I'm like, I'm never going to really look feminine. I'm never really going to be able to be feminine or be this idea of like this romantic idea of something, and I have to make peace with that. And there's something that with Casca, there was a way where like I felt like that was happening with her, especially in contrast to some of the people that Griffith flirted with. And there was also a way where like Casca like seemed okay in that, and that was something that I really admired.
Yeah. Are you polyamorous? I've not even asked you.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so...
I'm poly. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think I just mostly have like agreement that like it would just be really great if Casca could be with Guts, and then if they could both be with Griffith. Yeah, it would actually be like a really ideal situation. Like if that was something that would be able to happen, that they would all be like genuinely happy people, as opposed to what happens when we see in like the rest of Berserk, where it's just like extremely painful and devastating.
How meaningful do you think it is to just like take queer readings like this, like from what you said about Casca and how you relate to her and stuff like that? How important do you think it is that we just take a queer reading from something anyway? Like what value is there to it, in your opinion?
I think it's really important. I think a lot more people are more queer than they realize. Like, and of course I'm saying that as a queer person, but like just seeing all the stuff with like Guts and like all this stuff that's like expected of him as a man, and then Casca and all this stuff that's expected of her as a woman. Like even in the story, you can see how like all these things just like mess people up, and that's like not how that's much different than in real life. Queer people exist, and there's a good chance that a lot of people reading this are queer and don't realize it and have a lot to unpack. And it's really important to just be able to talk about that, and people just think it's like some sort of queer agenda, and it's actually just like, well, the way that we view gender and like have to put people in these like tiny little boxes is really oppressive. And so it's just like being able to see how like being able to me like some sort of a lot of queer analysis is just really unpacking like how ridiculous it is to try to constrain people to these two like small-minded binaries.
Have you read my script? Because you literally, like, when you said tiny little boxes, that is like one of the first things I say in this video.
That's also what you wrote, exactly.
It's literally, well, it's not exactly the same, but it's basically it. You know, the fucking
tiny little compartments.
Yeah, literally like the white settler colonialist, like, you know, no, you are this strict definition, like, you know, it's fucking bullshit, right? So, we can say that Casca speaks to Lua's queerness, and she enjoyed seeing her as a representative in Berserk. Which is rad, by the way, because that's how Casca appeared to me. When I first saw her, I read her totally as a trans mask person. And after speaking to Lua and hearing what Lua had to say about her, I can totally see her as a bi-gender person too. After hearing Lua's opinions on Casca, I was so delighted. Not only had one of my friends who knows Berserk felt like there was some representation there, but it really made me feel grateful to have queer friends. Queer friends that I just didn't have as I was growing up. And that's another thing that's really important about Berserk. It's the camaraderie between the characters and how they grow, learn more about each other, and learn to love each other alongside that. I think one thing that really fucks us up as queer people growing up is the isolation. I went through my teenage years in the noughties, and as a closeted bisexual, there were just no spaces for us. If there was, it was an extremely obscure forum page, probably with awful moderators and bad formatting, but the point of what I'm saying is that it wasn't obvious where to go. I googled so many times, am I gay for watching gay porn? And the answer was always yes. But there was just no possibility for bisexuality. Knowing that I definitely wasn't 100% all the way gay, These answers pushed me so far away from the queer community that I was homophobic as the rest of them, engaging with queerphobia just in the same way as my cis heteronormative friends did. The problem with this is that the relationship with one's queerness is the same as the relationship with the self. And if you are so vastly separated from who you are by a lack of education and representation, then what kind of damage does that do to a person? Queer trauma affects different people in different ways, but amongst the backdrop of late-stage capitalism, rising fascism, and climate change, a lot of us just want to be happy. Knowing who you are in that is half the battle. It's learning to accept that what you did was not your fault entirely, but the fault of a massive group of systems that have overrun our lives. If you're a cis het man watching this, and you're thinking that this video is part of the queer agenda, then you're right. But the queer agenda is not what you think it is. We don't want to steal or change the story of things that you love. We just want to see ourselves in things we can all love. You can keep your cis het reading of Berserk. Do what you want with it. But we need to take readings like this. Because if we don't, we hurt ourselves in so many ways.
Guts is who I most identify with in the story. I may not be able to accurately identify with him as he is disabled. He's also definitely not written as white. I'm pretty certain that Kentaro Miura wanted to portray him as a Japanese man. However, as a masculine bisexual man, those are the aspects of Guts that makes it important for me that he is in Berserk. Now, I've not written any of this, I've not scripted it, and the reason for that is that I wanted it to come across as open and honest as it could possibly be, just on how I actually feel about Guts and how I feel about representation in media, especially about bisexual men. 9 times out of 10 when we see bisexual men in media, we see things like Trevor in Grand Theft Auto.
I ain't no molester, Trevor.
Shut up before I molest you, all right?
Oh, Trevor.
Trevor is not your positive masculine bisexual representation. He is shown as someone who has no control over his actions due to mental illness, and that possibly that mental illness is the reason he's bisexual, which again, if you remember what I said at the start of the video, is not what you want to see. There is another film that portrays a bisexual man that again is extremely problematic in that portrayal, and that is a film called Race You to the Bottom. Race You to the Bottom is a story about a guy who cheats on his partner, who is a man, in order to get with a woman that he fancies. And they run away together, but also that relationship is super problematic, and it just really doesn't paint bisexuals in a good light whatsoever.
Daddy needs a mud bath, and I ain't going to no second-class joint.
I'll see what I can do.
Thanks, honey. You know, you and I should take a trip together sometime, huh? Hot stuff?
I'll call you back.
Oh, Race You to the Bottom.
Also, the bisexual man in question in that film is not masculine. He has masculine elements to him, the character, but he is not what you would call a traditionally masculine person. Now, I'm not talking about toxic masculinity here, I'm talking about positive masculinity. Just the elements of being masculine that are standard, like for example, being quite well built, being masculine in how you talk. What are positive elements of masculinity? Being able to stand up for your friends who may not be as strong as you. Guts is, as is shown in Berserk, confused, certainly, especially when he meets Griffith. He is not sure what to make of it, and as I mentioned earlier, he lets loose with a couple of slurs, you know? He doesn't really like the idea of being labeled a homo, but at the same time, he kind of doesn't care. So it's interesting to see that confusion in him. What's interesting to see in Guts and Griffith's relationship is how Guts eventually comes round to the fact that it's fine. It doesn't matter what Griffith thinks of him, whether Griffith thinks that he is a queer, whether Griffith thinks he is a homo or an F-word. He goes along and has a relationship with him anyway. And of course, there is no relationship beyond the platonic that we see in Berserk. But if you're taking a queer reading from it, maybe there's things that go on behind the scenes that we don't see. And Griffith is shown as having relationships with men. So you can infer that potentially, if you're going to take a queer reading from this manga, from this anime, that Guts and Griffith could have absolutely had a relationship. And the same with Griffith and Casca, and Guts and Casca as well. Well, Guts and Casca do have an explicitly mentioned definite relationship in the end. I think why it's important for me to see someone like Guts in media is because there are so few bisexual men represented in media that we actually need to take these readings for ourselves in order to make us feel like we're normal. In order to make us feel like we can build an identity for ourselves that isn't from the cis-hetero patriarchal norms that we normally see. I value my masculinity quite a lot. Not so much that I'm scared to lose it in any sense, or that like I have to absolutely define it at every single moment of my existence, but it's part of who I am. And it's not like it means the world to me, but to see it in other men and to see that they are also positive examples of masculinity is great. And one of those examples is absolutely in Guts, because while Guts is a vicious warrior, a killer, he can be extremely tender. There are moments that Guts has in that anime that show him as pensive, thoughtful, in touch with his emotions, in touch with reality, but also in touch with his trauma. I think that seeing Guts be able to acknowledge his trauma and acknowledge what he's going through at various points in the story solidifies that it's possible to be a positive masculine person. And the fact that we can take a queer reading from him as well shows that if you are a masculine person who doesn't identify with toxic masculinity whatsoever, or the oppression of other people, misogyny and sexism and patriarchy in those ways, seeing Guts be this positive, strong, masculine man, but also queer, may tell you that it's okay to be queer if you didn't realize that you were. At various points in the story, Guts is able to rely on his confidence in his own strength in order to be able to negotiate things emotionally. And what I mean by this is that he doesn't need to worry about the fact that he's able to protect his friends. And so he can make confident decisions, not just in battle, but also in political situations as well. There's one point in the story where Guts finally sees Griffith say exactly how he feels about his men. And up until this point, Guts was completely convinced that Griffith was, you know, he was into him and enamored with him to the point where he could do no wrong. And we see this at various points as well. Like, for example, when Guts takes his own decisions on the battlefield and Griffith forgives him for it because he makes his plans knowing that Guts can make his own plans. But at this moment, and specifically at this moment where Griffith is talking to Charlotte, Princess Charlotte, who he is planning to marry to gain political power, that Guts stumbles across this unfortunate reality. Griffith will never see him as his equal. He will always look down on him. And this is one of Griffith's main character flaws. He cannot stop himself from putting himself on this pedestal. When Guts realizes that, he breaks up with him. Griffith has another battle with him, and this is kind of where Griffith realizes he can never truly rely on the control that he has over people. This completely shakes the foundations of who he is and his entire plan, which causes him to just ruin things with Princess Charlotte. Reading Guts as queer in this story is actually really easy too. There are so many moments when it's very obvious that Guts is absolutely in love with Griffith, and that is, for example, very obvious when they face down Nosferatu Zod together. This is an enemy that neither of them are prepared to face, and in fact, it's only by extreme chance that they both survive. But when Guts sees Griffith knocked out, he is devastated, and he rushes to go and help Griffith, but is stopped by Casca, who rushes in and tells him this is all his fault, not to go near him. Again, we're seeing so many polyamorous vibes here. Also, the very fact that Casca can be read as either transmasculine or bigender shows that Guts is bisexual too, right? Because if you're going for specifically masculine people in who you are sexually attracted to, I'm sorry, but like there is an element of bi-ness there. And I might be biased, in that, but I think it's important again to take that away for the reading, right? Because I remember very much when I was growing up in a very toxically masculine world, the one that we live in, and I would tell my friends, my cis hetero male friends, that I would find certain people attractive. And one of the things that I remember quite specifically them saying to me about certain people that I found attractive, what the fuck you want about me? That's a man. What you want about? She looks so manly, right? Like there's something wrong with that. Seeing someone attracted to people like that and also being fine with it and remaining a positive masculine influence on the people around him is super fucking powerful. That's why I needed something like Berserk when I was growing up. That's why I needed something far more positive about bisexuality in my life. And that's why it's so good that there are more things out there for people nowadays, like Heartstopper, for example, which is a show with a much more positive, masculine, bisexual person in there for representation. And I'm not going to take away from some of the messages that you can get from Berserk if you are cis hetero male. For example, the fact that he struggles his entire life through unimaginable turmoil and pain. There are some of you out there who suffer with things like that. Suicidal ideation, depression, anxiety, fear, a constant need to prove your masculinity in a world where if you're seen as weak, you get fucking destroyed. But what I want you to do is if you see anyone who's like you getting mad at queer people saying stuff like this about things that you love, it would really just mean the world if you just said, oi, mate, stop. It's like Lua said, there are lots of people who grow up and they don't know what they are. And maybe labels don't matter. Maybe they do. That's not really what I'm here to debate today, but if you can put a label on what you are and that helps you, then that is extremely powerful. And if you can take something like that from something as simple as a fucking cartoon, then you need to be able to do that. Griffith is, well, he's gorgeous, but there's much more that you can say about Griffith that's a bit more important than that. He's tenacious, he is focused, he's caring, he's kind, he's loving, but he isn't afraid to step on people in order to achieve his goals. And I think it's important to point that out. However, when we talk about representation, I don't really see Griffith as someone I can identify with. In fact, I don't even really see him as a guy. But that's not really for me to say, is it? So I got one of my friends to talk about what she thinks about Griffith. You are my friend, Olivia.
Hey.
How would you describe your identity?
I am a non-binary trans feminine woman.
Sweet.
Yeah. Sexuality-wise.
Yeah, that works. Yeah. So
Are we still labeling that?
Yeah, fuck that. We don't need to do that. What is your history with Berserk?
Pretty limited up until more recently, actually. I've always kind of known about it, but never really sort of looked into it. And then playing the Dark Souls series reignited my interest in it, which then got me to borrow the books from you.
Is Berserk queer?
Yes.
What makes Berserk queer for you?
All sorts of aspects of it, I guess. Probably the representation of gender in its characters. You have the classic female sellsword who looks quite androgynous and boyish, and then you've got Griffith, obviously, who, I'm not quite so sure how I identify Griffith in terms of gender, really. I would say more kind of gender fluid. Well, they're definitely masculine, but they certainly have a clear femininity to them. Yeah, I mean, we never really see him present as anything other than masculine, for the most part. But he never really gets put into positions where his gender gets kind of challenged, I guess. Yeah, obviously the romance between Guts and Griffith, which I think is pretty clear. I think the way in which it plays out and the way in which it manifests and the way we see it is very much within the context of the environment. So you have two men as mercenaries, and when Guts meets Griffith for the first time, there's immediate kind of hierarchy. So it could never really play out as a kind of a classic sort of romance could.
Which character represents you the most?
Which character represents me
or
the
do you
most?
feel gives you representation?
Well, there's probably a couple. I mean, I think I can relate to each one of them in some way, but I think the ones that stick out the most would be Griffith. I think, if I had to discuss one, I think that he would be the person to discuss. Sort of physically, I've never really seen a character represented like that in fantasy media. Anime do it a lot, where they play with androgyny. Yeah, Griffith's representation is someone that is clearly very androgynous. There's no pretense with them, and that person is androgynous, incredibly feminine, in the way they appear. And quite calm and collected as well. It's a kind of power that you don't see represented in male characters very often. Certainly not male characters that are perceived so favourably, at least for the earlier part of Berserk.
How important is it for you that there are characters like Griffith, Casca and Guts in popular media?
Well, really important. I daydream all the time, and I think as a queer person I can maybe kind of use it as a way to just shut out a lot of the noise that's constantly telling me that I'm not quite right, without sounding really tragic. Like, living these kind of fantasy daydreams, and when I think about the blueprints for those are often the things that I see, in media, in television, in cinema, and in video games. I'm always kind of writing myself into these stories. Who would I be? So to have characters that reflect our ideologies, our gender identities, our sexuality, that's really important.
Do you think if you had a character like Griffith, do you think that might have helped you understand yourself a bit better, or at least accept yourself a bit better?
Definitely. When I was kind of figuring out who I was throughout my childhood, I was always really keen into sci-fi and fantasy and stuff, and me and my friends used to always muck about and play these games where we'd identify ourselves as different characters that we associated with in some way, characters we thought were cool, our heroes, all of that. And it was always a bit harder for me to find characters that I felt comfortable associating myself with in that way. I did often sort of identify as female characters. I think like my favourite superhero for ages was Rogue from the X-Men. She was feminine, she was hot, but she was tough. And I kind of identify more with those types of characters, but that got me kind of to a certain point in figuring out my gender identity, and that I understood that I was quite clearly female to a point. They still didn't quite fit. Yeah, at the time, it would be anime where I'd occasionally see characters that presented in a very feminine way but were actually men or masculine or had male characteristics, were more non-binary. They were always villains, and they usually met pretty nasty ends, and they were always called a homo by some other character in it. So yeah, it's really important in that. Yeah, those were the moments where I think I finally started to see little bits of who I could be. I just wish they weren't all horrible monsters, because then maybe I would have murdered all those people. No, I'm only joking. It's harder to find characters that I associate with on a more kind of intrinsic social and moral level.
Yeah, definitely. Talk to me a little bit about how you feel about that happening in Berserk, and like maybe some of the frustrations that you have with queer-coded characters being always the villain, always being called a
Yeah. Well, to be honest, I don't have a huge problem with the queer characters being a villain. I think one of the reasons that stopped me from being able to associate with them or connect with them at the time, or when I was younger, was probably a lot to do with the shame associated being with queer. And not, I'd rather say I want to be like Rogue than I want to be like the gay one. I don't really have too much of a problem with these characters being villains, because I think that helps me with a lot of the anger that I feel a lot of the time. Maybe once upon a time, maybe when I was a child and I was watching these things, I wouldn't have chosen to be a villain. But now as an adult, if you were to give me like a load of resources and an insane amount of power, or the worldly power that no one else can fathom, then I could very well end up being the villain. Just because life's really hard for a queer person. So there's a part of me deep down inside that would quite happily press the button and destroy everything to let life start again and give whatever comes next a better chance than what a lot of people have now. You know what I mean? Like, I think humans have got to a point now where they're their biggest threat, they're their biggest problem. So I do kind of relate to somebody that potentially wants to destroy everything and let new life start again, like that. You know, I think as a queer person, as a person that's experienced trauma, I think I can relate to that. When I think of a character that would be so angry as to burn the world down and salt the earth, they would be a trans woman. I think I can understand that. No, I don't have a problem with it. I think I would like a bit more balance.
That never at one point, and this has been like a trope in movies and media for decades, right? At not one point in Berserk, in the anime or in the manga, do any of the characters have a case of the not gays. You know,
no one corrects anyone.
Like, you know, when characters are like, something like a bit gay happens and then they're like, oh, titties, like, you know, like, it never happens. Because when I read Berserk, I'm not fucking reading, I don't think of it as something, I think of it as its own thing. I don't think I'm just like reading a comic book, I'm just reading a manga. I'm like, I'm reading Berserk. Yeah, it was made for me.
Well, but it wasn't, and I think that's one of the, like, I've never, you know, I've read a lot of manga, and I've watched a lot of anime, I've played a lot of video games, watched a lot of TV, read a lot of comic books, etc. I very rarely read things that are so clearly gay. You know what I mean? Like, usually I'm projecting onto most media heavily. So there's almost an element of exhaustion I get from trying to project myself into these stories. But with Berserk, it was a breeze to read. So, the most messed up we see Griffith, the most worried or upset we ever see Griffith is when he's naked, shivering and shaking after he's had sex with Charlotte. You know what I mean? So I'm like, this is your hero, and that's his kryptonite, shagging a beautiful woman.
And also, this is literally after Guts has left the Band of the Hawk.
Yeah. So it's just like, so Miura's created this character in Griffith that is going to be this fallen angel, you know what I mean? This wonderful hero that's been knocked off his pedestal. And what makes him so wonderful? Well, he's goddamn beautiful. And what knocks him off his pedestal? He kind of loves a man. And what really upsets him? Titties. Like,
after hearing Olivia's testimony on what Griffith and characters like him mean to her, it further entrenched my findings. This is a queer poly love story. However, this is, as stated previously, just in the Golden Age arc, and that is, what, maybe 15% of an extremely complex and fantastical epic? But when that arc is finished, well, if you don't know much about Berserk, this is where things get rough. If you don't want to hear about extremely fucked up mass murder and sexual assault, tune out until this timestamp. After Guts leaves the Band of the Hawk, aka breaks up with Griffith, as Olivia was saying, Griffith loses his shit. He goes into a dissociative state and basically rapes Princess Charlotte, lying in a pool of sweat and tears on the ground afterward. He completely fucks up his plans by being caught by a maid and then subsequently the royal guard. He even forgets his sword. All of these things are absurdly out of Griffith's character and mistakes he comes to regret. Griffith is put into the dungeons to be tortured till the end of his days, and the Band of the Hawk are attacked by the Midland Army and forced into hiding. Meanwhile, Guts is off training and helping a blacksmith in the woods who forges him some armor and a sword. Over the months of going from tournament to tournament, he comes across the Band of the Hawk again, and finally Guts and Casca get together in a really fucking tender love scene that is actually super queer as well. Guts, having known nothing of Griffith's capture and still caring for him, sets out with Casca, Juno, and Pippin, 2 other members of the Band of the Hawk, to rescue him. The man is a shell of his former self, having had his tongue cut out, his tendons cut, and malnourished for months. He can't even speak, let alone move. The only thing he does when he sees Guts is reach for his throat. It's obviously not possible for Guts to perceive this because Griffith is so weak that it doesn't really look like he's grasping to kill him. It more looks like he's reaching out for what I think Guts sees as a comrade who he desperately needs. But in reality, he is so consumed by both his hatred and love for Guts, at this point, he will do anything to get his revenge. But he doesn't even really know what that revenge is, and he's completely disabled. There is nothing he can do but breathe and watch in silence as the people who served him once now care for his every need. It's an incredibly upsetting scenario where we see he notices the closeness between Casca and Guts that has now developed unbeknownst to him. Seemingly wanting to get back at Guts, he desperately tries to grope and assault Casca whenever she's close, to no avail, as obviously he can't do anything due to his injuries. In one final act of desperation, he tries to kill himself on a sharpened tree stump in a river. When extremely creepily, the Behelit amulet he has had on him this entire time finds its way back to him. This unlocks hell, and the entire Band of the Hawk are dragged into their deaths. Griffith is deceived by 4 Cenobite-style demon angels who are known as the God Hand. They've been searching for their 5th member and they convince Griffith to join them, saying they will make him all-powerful and give him what he truly wants, a kingdom for himself, if he sacrifices those he loves. He gives in to their deception, and every single member of the Band of the Hawk is subsequently eaten alive by horrific demons. Guts is the only one able to fight them off due to his sheer strength and will to survive, but Griffith, reborn as Femto, the 5th God Hand member, swoops down, grabs Casca, who is still alive, orders the demons known as apostles to hold Guts in place and make him watch as he rapes her. So, yeah, it turns out Griffith is the worst person in the world and actually terrible queer representation. Wrap it up, sunk cost fallacy, video over, bye. The truth of the matter is that all the people we read as queer, and even those explicitly queer like Griffith, are problematic in depiction in Berserk. Even if that reading is just that, a reading. If that's the only representation we have, it's still terrible representation. Guts, as I've said, is violent and becomes incensed with rage at various points throughout the story, letting it take over his life and blinding himself to the damage he does to others. Griffith is abusive and coercive even before he lets his trauma turn him into the literal devil, and Casca is read as a damsel in distress, yet actually somehow at the same time a strong woman, and later on gets her autonomy completely taken away from her and becomes non-verbal and dissociative due to the things she experiences in the Eclipse. It would also be remiss of me not to mention that the suffering of a queer-coded person of colour is a less than ideal, to put it lightly, story point for Guts to hinge his entire revenge on, which is how Berserk moves forward in this, by the way. The Eclipse makes things messy as hell, and I think that's why it's important for me to say here, right now, the reality of it all. There is no indication anywhere from his entire life that the creator of Berserk, Kentaro Miura, was queer in any way. It's hard to believe, isn't it, with all the queer coding that is actually present in Berserk, despite readings that we might be sort of reaching for, but there's just no evidence for it. No interviews, no statements, not even in the other media he liked that inspired Berserk, it's just not there. Guts is not a bisexual king. Casca's not by gender, and Griffith is not non-binary. In fact, Griffith is the only definitively queer person in Miura's story, and he ends up being a mass murdering serial rapist and abuser. That's the opposite of what we need. Miura definitely wrote him as a bad because he's queer and queer people are weird and bad kind of character trope that we all know too well from lots of media from the 90s and before. The queer-coded elements of Berserk I just think were complete chance, and he really didn't understand what he was writing in more ways than one. As someone who creates stuff, I kind of get it. It doesn't make it right, but I do get it. That can happen. Berserk was Miura's masterpiece. It was his magnum opus. It was the biggest, most painstaking, meaningful thing that he ever wrote. And I think at least somewhere down the line, the point got warped and changed at least a few times. Yeah, the reality sucks. And that is the true point of this video. Growing up with so few representations of queer people in media means that we're forced to hold on to implicit queer readings about explicitly cis-het characters, or problematic queer characters, no matter how fucked up and evil they are. I think that's where the whole gay agenda thing comes from. And we see it nowadays so much more clearly when we are having positive representation of who we are in media crop up, and it gets labeled as wokeism or too political. We can't have anything. We can't even have our own fantasies about stories that aren't even about us, or even make us look how bigots want us to look, evil as fuck. There is an argument, however, for queer people to not be perfect. Not evil genocidal maniacs, but, you know, not perfect. And that's because we're not. I'm not saying we should have more queer people like Griffith in media, but it would betray the reality of the queer experience to try and make out that we all exist in a perfect cutesy pastel reality. Queer life is hard. The overwhelming majority of us are working class, living paycheck to paycheck. Lots of queer people are addicted to drugs and sex, mainly because our lives are pretty fucking hard to deal with, given how much we're under attack all the fucking time. Our trans siblings specifically at the moment, as I'm sure we're all aware. To say that it's impossible for us to be nihilistic, apathetic bastards is to deny what queer trauma can do to a person. Francis Lee, the director of God's Own Country and Ammonite, two queer period films that definitely have less than perfect queer people in them, tweeted this the other day. Make your gay characters complex, problematic, nasty fuckers who do bad things, unapologetic, evil, manipulative, unlikable, three-dimensional, villainous, not just the cute teens holding hands. And this got me thinking. I've mentioned a lot in this video about queer trauma and how it hurts everyone around us. When Olivia said that she sometimes just wishes she could watch the world burn, I get it. I completely fucking get it. We are so hounded every single moment of our lives from our extremely sensitive formative years through puberty and family rejection, legislation and fascists attempting to rid us from existence, denial of our own sexuality, gender trauma, sexual trauma, voices on the inside and out telling us we aren't allowed to be who we literally fucking are, abuse and violence. We've been through the fucking mill, and it's only getting worse. However, this is why Berserk, despite its poor rep, is still important to me as a queer person. What Berserk does better than any other media I've seen in a long time is that it pulls no punches regarding how awful the world can be and how hard the struggle can be to get through it in one piece. As LGBTQIA+ people, we can't fall into pessimism, because that means, well, it means the end of the road for a lot of people. And that's not a crime, by the way. I'll do no such thing as shame anyone for their circumstances. Our very consciousness, this existence in the world around us is such a bizarre, incomprehensible thing, a true weight on the shoulders of many folk. People are desperately trying to define it at all times, and in doing so, hurt some of the most vulnerable people out there. Why can't we just be allowed to enjoy our existence? Why must we deal with the pain, the suffering, the loss of loved ones, the spurned hopes and dreams and desires, the trauma, the betrayal? That's why we need readings of media that speak to us. That's why we need media that shows some of us going through the worst things imaginable and coming out the other end. We also need to see nasty, awful queer people, just like Francis Lee says, so we can understand the damage of queer trauma and why it needs to end. Media needs to be written by us and for us. I know the tired media trope of queer pain is quickly becoming unpopular, and I agree with that. We should have media that shows us at our best and shows our joy, even despite all the things I've said. I still choose to see Berserk as a queer polyamorous love story because Berserk is incredible to me. Because we don't just get to see the pain of the characters, we get to see them heal. We get to see Guts realize that he can get close to people again. We get to see Griffith attempt to reconcile with the sacrifice he made and the abuse he dished out. We get to see Casca get her autonomy back. That's why we need media that's set up that way. We need to know that we will be able to get better, despite the tragedy, despite the hurt, despite the suffering, that one day things will be okay. None of us are perfect, and it's absurd to think that we are, or even could be, but that's not important. What's important is that we learn, experience happiness, forgiveness, and most importantly, love. When queer people find love, or even simple companionship in this world that hates us, doesn't want us around, and at the very least barely tolerates us, it is magical. When we find someone who we could be our true, degenerate, filthy, goblin, fae, witch, elf mode, ass fucking pussy eating, gender twisting selves with, it means the world. No, it is our world. This is the world we live in, and even though Berserk is full of betrayal, hate, demons, revenge, trauma, and swords that could never be swung by any actual person, it's actually pretty accurate to the kind of horrible shit that we go through IRL. If there's one thing that Miura certainly knew about, it's this stuff. And historical medieval Europe, North Africa, and Central Asia. He clearly chose these as his inspiration for a lot of Berserk. I'm a medieval history nerd, and I was so impressed when I saw not just the weapons and armor of the soldiers in the countless battle scenes that litter the many pages of Berserk, but the designs of the Kushan, possibly named after the kingdom of Kush, an ancient Nubian kingdom. It was accurate down to the weapons, horse armor, the war elephants, all used by the Kushites and Central Asian kingdoms in the Middle Ages and before. It really struck me that Miura loved medieval history and used that as the backdrop for Berserk's events, and it got me thinking. He probably wanted the brutality of the story to be reflected in the backdrop, as medieval times were really fucked up. I mean, you've got the Iron Maiden, the rack, hot pokers down the urethra, but have you ever even heard of an oubliette? They would just like throw people in holes and let them starve to death. Shit was fucked. But what better setting to portray the absolute devastation and pain that the main characters go through mentally in Berserk than this? Then I realized something. All of the events that take place in Berserk are a nod to these historically brutal times. The torture devices I just mentioned are all present, or at least implied, during Griffith's torture. There's the Holy See, who are the Inquisition, the war with the Kushan is the Crusades, and there's even 100 Years' War in there. It's easy to see just how fucked up monarchs and imperialists sending people to their death based on the idea of a state is, even just by reading the first few volumes of the Golden Age arc. I started thinking about how this awful, fucked up world is probably what drove Griffith to betray his comrades for power, and how it made Guts as ruthless and violent as he is. And then it hit me.
Not only is Berserk a queer, polyamorous love story, it's also an anarchist analysis of the cycle of abuse under power structures. Some of you who have been watching my videos before might actually be watching this and thinking, oh my god, Muel, this is so much better than your previous videos where you just like sit in front of a green screen and do whatever you want. And if you are watching that and you have thought about supporting me before, then please consider becoming a patron. That's so shit. I'm not going to put that in there. Fuck it. Oh my god.
Think about it. You can put that in at any point.
So embarrassing.
it's me. This is the true outro, not the fake outro that was before. This is the real one. Yeah, it's 2:45 p.m. In the day here. Like, I've just finished editing everything. Basically, it's ready to render, it's ready to process. So yeah, let me tell you, this has been a journey, and thank you so much for watching episode 1 of what I'm calling season 2 of DJ Muel. Yeah, like I said in the fake out outro, you could probably tell that I put a lot more effort into this video in more ways than one, and it has not been without its technical difficulties. One of which, for example, I was just recording this outro and I'd finished everything. I'd said everything that I want to say that I'm gonna say to you now, and then I looked at the camera and it said there's no space on this memory card, so that completely fucked up the recording of it. So I'm having to do it again now, which is great. I'm definitely not losing my mind. It's definitely not making me more insane than I already am. But yeah, I've gone through all sorts of issues with it, like, you know, editing in 4K. That's a whole thing. Why did nobody tell me how hard it is to edit in 4K? My computer, my poor, beautiful, sweet computer that I've had for like 10 fucking years is like desperately chugging along trying to get this shit rendered and processed. And it's just dying. I've been sat here like staring at the screen for like hours and hours and hours, trying to like track the blur stuff, you know, like blowing all everyone's faces out with registration plates on cars and stuff, like just desperately like tracking it, like, you know, clicking the button and then having to wait for like 10 seconds for the frame to update. Like, oh my god, it's been a pain in the arse, let me tell you. I got my drone stuck in a tree and then like it got dead windy and fell out, and one of the beautiful denizens of Manchester, UK stole it. I don't even know how they would like sell it, because I still have the fucking remote control. I still have like the batteries and the charger and everything, so I don't even know how they're gonna make money off that. They probably needed it more than me, so it's all good. Chalk it up to experience, whatever. You might have noticed like a couple of things that like are a little bit weird in this video. For example, in the part where I'm kind of like just introducing people to how queer Berserk is, and there's like the TV with the green, it's just got a green screen on it. Yeah, that I was trying to do that. You're right. If you did think that and you were thinking, I hope he addresses this at some point, here it is. This is me addressing the fact that I tried to do a green screen effect on that, but unfortunately it looked like dog shit. So I just removed that because it just fucked with the integrity of the shot. And to be honest, it actually works out quite nice with the purple and the green. You know, those are like opposite colors on the color spectrum. Anyway, whatever, doesn't matter. But yeah, that is why I want to give a real special shout out to my patrons, my Patreon community, and of course my Twitch community as well. Like, thank you so much everybody for supporting me, for basically helping me to survive through this long process. You know, you've paid my rent for me, you've basically fed me, you've paid my bills, and I really appreciate you all supporting me, basically doing, you know, the job that I want to do. Despite all the issues, it has been a fun process. Me and Brad has had an absolute laugh filming this, and of course, you know, just getting to hang out with like Professor Flowers and Olivia, my friend, like, you know, while I was making this, it was really, really important to me. It was a really fun experience, and I'm really happy with it, to be honest. Like, I really didn't think that this was like how it was going to turn out. I did just want this to be like a silly kind of like, oh, all you edgy guys who like Berserk, well, you know, it's actually gay, you know, one of those kind of things. You probably noticed that I title a lot of my videos, you know, with a view to annoy people, you know, and that was kind of how this started. But yeah, as I say in the video, you know, after speaking to Olivia, after speaking to Lua, and like thinking about it more myself, it did end up having like a decent message, and yeah, it's the best piece of work I've done in a long time. So yeah, thank you so much to everyone who's supported me in the meantime, for being so patient with it all. I really, really hope that you like the end product. Please leave me a comment. Of course, I do read them all, even if some of them are quite nasty sometimes. But yeah, it means the world to me to know what you thought about this video, if this spoke to you as a queer person. But even if you're just a fan of Berserk, like, you know, let me know what you think about Kentaro Miura and like his process and his writing and stuff. And do you think that like he meant to make Griffith a queer villain, or, you know, was it just like something that he wasn't really thinking about too much? I love discussing Berserk, and I love discussing all the ins and outs of it, and you'll see that in the second part of this little mini series that I'm doing on Berserk. But if you want to hear more about what's going to be happening in the next video, then please consider becoming a patron. There's already some updates about this next video in the Patreon, so check that out, please. The link will be in the description below. There are loads of awesome benefits to becoming a patron. You do get your name in the video, even at the lowest tier, which I think is £2 at the moment. And of course, the higher tiers have a few more benefits as well, like you get access to my Be Real, you get access to patron-only streams, patron-only videos, behind-the-scenes content. For example, with this video, me and Olivia, who is featured in the interview, as you've seen, and also the videographer and assistant cameraman Bradders, Daniel Bradley, my friend, we're going to be sitting down and doing a commentary track for this video, and probably the next video as well. So if that is something that interests you, that'll be on the Patreon as well. Also, there's a lot of outtakes and you know, things that happen in this video that you know, obviously, like I said before, the drone got stuck in the tree, and I'm making a little bit of content about that. We actually filmed me and Bradders trying to get the drone out of the tree. That was a whole fucking thing, but that's going to be on the Patreon in a few weeks. So yeah, loads of awesome extras for you to check out over there on Patreon, so please consider supporting me there. You also get these cool anarchist pin badges sent out to you at the highest tier, anti-fascist super soldier, and of course, as you saw in the credits there, you also get your own unique little sketch that I'll put in the credits of the video for you yourself. But yeah, make sure you hit me up on all the other socials. They'll be in my link tree down in the description of the video. You can check me out on Twitter, you can check me out on Instagram, TikTok, all of the social media, they're all there. And don't forget to hit up my Twitch streams. We have an excellent laugh in the Twitch streams a lot of the time, and of course you can actually support me there as well. If you want to, you could probably just donate to my PayPal as well. I guess I'll put like a link to that in the description, or maybe in my link tree. If you want to get a feel of what my Twitch streams are like, check out the other channel, which is my Twitch VOD archives, so DJ Muel stream archives on YouTube, and you can get a link to that down in the description as well. And please make sure you check out Professor Flowers content as well. Excellent content creator, good friend of mine. You can get a link to her stuff down in the description below. And of course, thank you so much, FD Signifier, for lending your voice to the video as well. I think it worked really, really well. Check out his content as well. That's down in the description too. But I'm sure a lot of you have actually found my channel from him, so you probably won't need to do that. But also, final plug from me, please, please, please check out our show, Red Planet, which is every Sunday at 8 p.m. UK time. We basically talk about how to make the transition from capitalism to a better world easier for everyone. We talk to organizers, we have guests on like other content creators, activists, and try and basically inspire people on how to get started in activism and yeah, try and make the world a better place essentially. So you can check us out over on YouTube and on Twitch. We go live on YouTube and Twitch every Sunday at 8 p.m. We also are available on every podcast platform, so if you listen to podcasts and you want to check that out, everywhere that you get your podcasts, you should be able to get them a link to Red Planet on. And also please consider supporting us on Patreon for Red Planet, because Conrad, he needs better flavored gruel. We were considering putting sugar in the gruel that we feed to poor Conrad Zimmerman, our producer, but it was a bit too decadent, and we need more Patreon supporters basically in order to do that. So, you know, that's on you really if you choose not to support us on there. But yeah, in all seriousness, thank you so much everybody for supporting me and checking out this video all the way to the end. Give us a like, give us a comment, give us a subscribe, put the notifications on if you want to be notified when the next video comes out. And yeah, I'm gonna have my breakfast because I woke up this morning and just started working on this video. I'm like super fucking burnt out right now. I'm probably gonna go to the gym because I've not been in a week, and then I might go and see my mum and have a cup of tea with her because yeah, I've not seen her in a while either, so that's what I'm gonna go and do. Thank you for watching. Stay excellent to each other. Peace.